So welcome to the RevOps Co-op webinar. This one is sponsored by CaliberMind. And today we're going to be talking about how to better support marketing and revenue operations. The reason why we came up with this topic as a group is because when the economy isn't going well, there is one department in the go-to-market team that tends to face very big budget cuts the earliest, and that tends to be marketing. So, and they're under a ton of pressure to prove that what they're doing works. And we thought that would be a great opportunity for revenue operations professionals to step in and assist their marketing leaders. So, Jack, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk with each of you today. My name is Jack Foster. I am the Chief Marketing Officer at WorkRamp. WorkRamp is the learning cloud. We power all of your learning at work across employees and customers. So think about things like onboarding, talent development, revenue enablement, compliance training, and then on the customer side, powering customer education programs, scaling your partner training, all of that can be on WorkRamp. I have been at WorkRamp for 2 years leading the marketing team. I just actually had my anniversary, which was lots of fun. So it's been a great journey here, and I've been in tech for over 15 years, leading teams for the last 10. And yeah, excited to be here. This is a fun topic for sure, and a relevant topic in today's environment, especially as you mentioned.
We're thrilled to have you here. Doug, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I am a fractional executive. I've spent the last 20 years watching SaaS evolve. It's been a great journey, sort of watching marketing evolve from being sort of brand centric all the way up to today's topic, really, which is how is marketing evolving into being more sort of data centric, data centered, and from a decision standpoint. But I've seen that evolution. One of my clients is CaliberMind, and it is near and dear to my heart what CaliberMind's tackling, which is, how do we help marketers better measure their impact using the data they have at their disposal to do so. And I have to say, to me, it's the analogy or the metaphor I always mix them up is there's so many companies driving around without a windshield in their car. And what CaliberMind does is it gives you that windshield, that view into the marketing performance. That's at the end of the day what the company does. And frankly, that car you're driving is a Ferrari. It's an amazing tool.
And I guess I will actually introduce myself this time. I usually forget, but I'm Kamala Thompson. I head up marketing efforts here at the RevOps Co-op. But before that, and being in marketing leadership at CaliberMind once upon a time, before that, I spent 15 years in revenue operations, spanning sales, marketing, and customer success. So it was kind of revenue operations before there was a name for it. And it's been an interesting evolution. Spent all that time in really B2B tech, mostly SaaS towards the back half of my career. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we'll get the slides up. All right, so I want to remind people that Q&A is open, so is chat. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask. But this is meant to be a dialogue between the three of us because we have similar but different perspectives. So I come at it from an ops angle, and we're really here to talk about if and why marketers may struggle in the boardroom. So do they struggle? What does this group see?
Jack, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, the question here, why isn't there a gold standard board deck for marketers? I think we can all agree that most marketing teams now are reporting on things like pipeline and revenue. And if not, that is definitely like step one, is getting the reporting and North Stars in place so that marketing can tie initiatives back to pipeline and revenue. And so while there might not be a gold standard yet, I do think we're at a time, as we're talking about, where you really have the technology and the ability to show the impact marketing is having on those bigger business initiatives. So we might be getting to a point where there is a gold standard. But I think, there traditionally may have been difficulties with this, because the truth is, you mentioned the evolution, Doug, right? We've all been in tech for a long time, and seeing this evolution. Marketing teams were not able to before tie their initiatives to things like pipeline revenue. You might come in and be talking about things like website traffic or MQLs, but not necessarily able to show what the impact is on the business. And so that's where I think this kind of historically has been a challenge. So I'll pause there, and Doug, let you jump in, but that's kind of, jumping off point for me on this topic.
I agree with everything you said, Jack. And I think the only other color I would add is that there is no gold standard, if you will. And there's a few things in there. I agree with Jack. I just think it's really hard to get there. But you've got a few things at play. The first is, channel activation is way off, especially in SaaS, compared to where it was even 6 months or 2 years ago. And the reason I mention that is that means that your reporting metrics need to shift and change. That's one thing. Second thing, and look, this is not all SaaS all the time, but really it's our core market. There's a lot of upheaval in SaaS right now. And so I talked about, channel activation, but you also have the situation where I feel like we're doing a better job of putting out there the leading and trailing metrics that do two things for us. One, we're going to dig into this a bit, but one is our ability to talk about what happened and why. And I feel like those are standardized, right? I feel like I see more consistency there. So to the degree there's a gold standard, I do see that. Where I see confusion and quite often some maneuvering is on the leading indicators. And when I see CMOs lead into leading indicators that actually show off their initiatives, I think that's when I'm seeing more of a gold standard push, if you will. But at the end of the day, things are changing so quickly and things are so tough for SaaS, those metrics have to shift. There is no gold standard.
Okay, we have a question. Can you define what you mean by channel activation and how it affects pipeline?
Great clarifying question. Thanks for that. The stuff we were doing before, think email marketing, think a lot about the outbound activity. By the way, it's not just what marketing is doing, it's what the organization's doing. So the seller's ability to get pipeline going through outbound efforts. Specifically, we're seeing a lot of struggle with SDRs. And a part of that is just that I think there's some just exhaustion on the part of prospects because that SDR formula really got overemphasized for a long time. So the outbound is not working. But we're seeing, declining response rates in paid social. SEO is still looking really solid. That's still a really good investment, but it's not activating, meaning we're not seeing the things we would normally count on, if you will, the baseline. It feels like the baseline has gone down.
So even before the economy kind of took a turn, we started seeing declines in quota attainment globally across sales teams. I believe it went from 58 to 48% in the last 7 years, as opposed to the gold standard, which was really, you should aim like hopefully 80, but usually 60 is where you're aiming for when you're designing quota plans. Speaking from a background in ops, it's just changed so much. And I would like to echo, and I'm wondering if part of this development of standard metrics and focus on it lately, I think there's been a bit of a shift and an increase in focus because more and more buyers want to be digital. They want to be online. They want to do their research online. They want to interact with your product before they talk to anybody. So I think the importance of marketing, and maybe this is just by bias because I did land in marketing, but I feel like because of how the buyers are demanding to interface with your solutions, we're having to rethink and get a bit more serious about how we prove marketing's impact because it's becoming really crucial to do it well. Does that resonate with you, or am I?
It does with me, Kamala, and that sort of puts the pressure on those leading indicators that I mentioned before and our ability to interpret them. And to throw that term channel activation in there, if our expectations aren't being met in terms of historical standards on we do stuff and prospects or buyers react in a certain way, it makes it harder and harder to interpret that data.
So let's take a moment and define vanity metrics. It's something we've kind of all thrown out here. Whichever of you wants to take it.
Yeah,
Jack, what's your favorite?
Yeah, thanks. So vanity metrics, can still be important. I think it's kind of an interesting like way to call them vanity, because that kind of means they don't mean anything, but they still actually can have an important part of your business, an important part of telling your story. I think when you're thinking about vanity metrics, to me, what that means are metrics that you can't actually tie to a bigger business strategic goal or initiative. So if you are just talking about website traffic, right? Click-through rates, open rates on emails, engagement rates on certain ads, even like cost per click, right? Things like that. And you aren't able to tie that to a bigger story of why these things are important to your marketing strategy, why these things are important to getting to the goals that your business has set. That's when it becomes a vanity metric. I think if you can use those data points as a way to tell a bigger story, it's different. That is actually a different situation, because you could, for example, come in and say, we've grown organic traffic to our website X% year over year, and this is helping us with brand awareness and to reposition our company. And we're seeing increases in organic pipeline. Like, that's a totally different story than just coming in and saying, oh, we got, our website traffic up. So I think you look down on vanity metrics when you can't actually tie it to bigger things, but in and of themselves, they are helpful inputs into making decisions and telling a bigger story across the business.
We'll get to Charlie's question in a moment, but I wanted to build on that just a little bit. I think it's really important for everyone, including revenue operations, to realize that there need to be regular data reviews across the marketing team. And depending on which team you're working with, those numbers need to look different. And some of those are going to be vanity metrics because they're very important to those teams doing their job well. The reason why we call them vanity metrics, though, is because it's not what the board's looking for. Ultimately, the board is looking for pipeline revenue, spend efficiency, these sorts of things, as opposed to, as a digital marketer, I need to understand how my ads are performing early on so I can make adjustments before it even gets to the point that it's pipeline. So how difficult is it to measure on lead to opportunity conversion rates by channel, as Doug defines channel, i.e. outbound, email, events, inbound, etc.? Oh, that's a big question.
Do you want me to take it?
Run. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard if you don't have great. I'll back up a bit. The typical organization these days, I think they have a data lake and they have some sort of BI layer. And I think if you have that, it's a little bit easier to measure. Certainly, I will tell you, I feel like Salesforce Sales Cloud has gotten better, a little bit better. They've got last touch and first touch. I'm going to jump into attribution a bit here, Kamala. So that it's a little bit easier. But I would say overall, it's sort of like the standard. Because you're like, if you don't have a handle on this data, you're going to struggle in other areas. So I think the average organization has enough of their data organized that it's fairly easy to measure. And frankly, if they don't, then there's a new CMO who comes on board and makes sure that happens.
Yeah. Just even thinking about like, why isn't there a gold standard? Different organizations will measure things differently. I mean, going in even into attribution rate, you might be on a first touch attribution model, you might be on a last touch attribution model. And so that can differ kind of company to company. But I think the most important thing is that you're not creating your metrics in a vacuum. You're doing that with your go-to-market leaders. You're doing that with your CFO. So everybody has the same understanding, at least, of what you're measuring. And then that makes it a lot easier, at least if it's standardized across the company, to report on those things. I think it gets really messy. When marketing is reporting one way, there's not a single source of truth. You have a different data set. That's when things get really messy. And you can lose credibility. So it's really important, just however you're measuring the things, that's actually how the whole business believes and looks at, measuring in the same way.
I totally agree, Jack. And I want to double down and say the reason why I see attribution fail so many times is because it's not taken on as a cross-functional project. And people aren't working and reaching across the aisles and defining what the other teams need in order to buy in on it. And by that, I mean, which touch points are you including? If you go to the board with your attribution model, is sales going to object because they expect to be represented in those numbers and their effort should be there? Or do you agree that this is an estimate to help marketing optimize their campaign performance. There has to be some really foundational conversations before, to Charlie's point, opportunity conversion rates by channel can be the gold standard, because everybody does it differently. And
Yeah,
it
and
can't
Kamala,
be a marketing siloed project. Go ahead, Doug.
yeah, and Kamala, sorry to interrupt you. I think that I was a little glib. I would say that it is hard if you don't have some sort of basic attribution capabilities. It can be incredibly hard for that measurement. And I would say that the reason I'm referring to, business analytics tools, BI tools, generally speaking, that doesn't solve the problem per se, but at least gives you a forum in which to solve the problem. But if you don't have those basics in place, it's incredibly hard. And I've had lots of clients who, at the end of the day, can't tell you how their channels are performing because they're unable to measure them. And I've had the luxury of working with very RevOps centric companies like Caliber Mind, where it's just a part of the landscape. You can find that information in a moment, and it's a real luxury when you have that.
Oh boy, is it. So ZQ asked, there are many touch points along the customer journey. How do we tie those marketing metrics to the result of pipeline or revenue? And the only way I've seen it done elegantly is through multi-touch attribution. Have you seen other approaches?
Jack, what about you? I spent a lot of time in the industry. I'm curious what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think multi-touch, single touch, I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying, where you just need to have the definition of what. So, are you looking at sourced pipeline? Are you looking at influenced pipeline? That might even change. Like if you're a more transactional SMB business,
Yep.
You might really not have as many touch points, right? It might really be someone comes in to your website, asks for a demo request, and, moves in the process. If you're an enterprise business where your deal cycle is a year long, there's of course going to be multiple touch points across that type of an engagement. But I do think it goes back to just defining how you're measuring source pipeline basically and revenue, and being able to report on that. Now, it doesn't mean you can still talk about other touch points. So for example, for us, we're actually on a last touch attribution model, right? We look at what was the thing that actually created the meeting with our sales team as the point of influence and how we report on pipeline. But we also have our first touch in there, and we can go back and say, okay, well, maybe we met this person at an event a year ago, but they came back through the website. So multi-touch is really important, but I do think it ultimately comes down to how are you just defining that and being consistent in how you define and report on that.
And then we had a comment from the audience. Would not a strong RevOps team be able to facilitate a cross-functional team that designs and implements an appropriate multi-touch attribution solution? Yes, and that is why we were here talking about this, because it's really important.
Yeah, I think DIY, and this is our passion for a while working together, Kamala. But I think everybody starts with DIY, and I think that's fine. And the original question around how do you manage interpreting all those touch points across what can be pretty long buyer journeys or pretty circuitous buyer journeys? Yes, you can self-build. But I would say you're going to get into the scintilla arguments over which touch is more weighted and why. So I would, to the degree that you can get open source attribution formulas, go grab them when you implement your DIY model.
There are so many landmines, and it's really important to work with somebody who has seen them. Okay, so
one other thing, just looking at this question, going back to having the same data sets, I love a centralized RevOps team. I think we are also seeing, companies move to not having marketing ops sit in marketing ops, not having sales ops sit in sales ops, customer success operations. This is all becoming one centralized team for this exact reason, so that there is that consistency across the business.
Yes.
So just, again, I'm sure many people on this call are part of different ways that teams are organized. That is one of the major benefits of obviously having a centralized revenue operations team, is for that consistency and basic understanding across the business.
Agree. So we have a few questions. Could we touch on the difference between sourced versus influenced? Unfortunately, people defined define those two things different ways. So for some organizations, sourced means first touch attribution. For some, it means anything that happens prior to opportunity creation, or it could mean last touch of the thing that happened immediately before the opportunity is created. It depends on the organization. Influence could collectively mean all of the collective touch points or everything that happens after opportunity creation. It just depends. So again, there's that lack of a quote unquote gold standard because the metrics and terminology we use in B2B aren't necessarily consistent across companies. And then if a company has a very different self-serve and sales-led motion, how important is it to have a single attribution framework for the company versus across different business units? Oh, I have opinions, but Doug or Jack, would you like to take this first?
Gosh, Campbell, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
So I think the reason why we have different attribution models is because they answer different questions. So if you have a very transactional self-service, so you have an entry to your product that's very transactional, you have a low price point, I think it's okay to use single touch attribution, first and last touch to figure out what's most effective at first attracting people and then converting people at that point. And you're defining the conversion differently. So you kind of need two different models. I think it's possible to have one blended model across the business. That's why we take averages and things like that when we're looking at what works and what doesn't. But if you have very different behavior, it is worth looking at it differently. Anybody feel differently?
I don't. I have an anecdote which I'll share really quickly, which really drills into how, first of all, ambiguous and how random it can feel when you're trying to set up a model. So the example I'll give you is trade show 2 years ago. Large company walks into a trade show booth I'm working. That trade show, that booth visitor turned into a pretty big deal for the organization. Deal meaning close one business. That person was walked in by our head of partnership, and that prospect had been referred by a partner. Mm-hmm. But we found out later that prospect also had experience with the brand a year and a half ago. They went silent on us, showed up on a webinar 7 months later, ended up in the pipeline and closed later on. How do you interpret that flow, if you will, right? And then we could repeat that again and again and again and again in terms of sort of these anecdotal moments when multiple channels interacted, mm-hmm. if you will. And sort of that is the reason that I push people to actually put attribution models in place.
Yes.
Because what you're doing is you're arguing over the number of angels that can dance on the head of a pin, right? So, and if you've got, by the way, if that scenario sounds familiar to you, in other words, that's typical, it's sort of the opposite of the picture Kamala painted, which is, hey, you can do a single touch right. Attribution model and be fine. If you have a long, complex deal cycle and you have multiple channels influencing that deal cycle, put something in place, for God's sakes. And if it's a DIY model, great, but put something in place.
Yeah. And then add on, not only you're talking about like one single person, the journey, take that at the account level, right? When you have multiple buyers in a big buying committee and you need to be influencing multiple people, I mean, think about how complex that gets, right? When you start looking at the account level. So what I'm hearing, and I think we're all agreeing on, is that like the TLDR is like, just have a way to measure it and agree on a way to measure it. Like there's going to be imperfections probably no matter which way you do it, but you just need to have the consistent way to do it.
I remember that like all models are wrong, but some are useful. Bruce Bugby at Caliber Mind would say this all the time. He's our data scientist. And as long as you're using the same measurements consistently, you can get value out of it. So start somewhere, just anywhere. So let's roll on. I want to get to the point where we can talk about the specific KPIs by stage, because I think people will get a lot of value out of that. So why is it so hard? This is our current marketing ecosystem, according to Scott Brinker and team at the MarTech Map. And I remember I've worked with salespeople. This was their favorite slide because this is why our data is so complicated. I think from an operations perspective, I will also raise that sales tools like your CRM tend to be very account centric and have the concept of a company with people, even though Salesforce complicates a little bit with leads and Dynamics does the same. However, most marketing tools don't think of the world that way because we're measuring individual interactions with human beings. So The two tools, for example, Marketo doesn't have a standard out of the box account concept. It doesn't have that object that can branch across everybody. We're relying on things to transfer into our CRM to be able to do that. So when I was in sales operations, I would get so frustrated with marketing operations and wondering why things would be blown up and the data was different every single time. This is why. Anything either of you want to add there? And then we have some questions.
I feel bad for Scott. And I've talked to Scott a couple of times. Scott produces this brilliant guy. At some point, this just becomes pixels. And I think we're pretty close.
Yeah.
I think you hit it, Kamala. Nail on the head.
Let's see here. So we are recording. We will send out the deck. That's what people are asking about. We will send out the recording. So if you have to miss any of this, please check it out. Let's keep rolling. So let's talk about legitimacy in the boardroom. So we talked about the need to tie marketing efforts to pipeline and bookings and how critical that is. We touched very briefly on spend efficiency. What should marketers consider presenting or not presenting, as the case may be, to prove their impact to the board? What is the board looking for?
I think before we can answer that question, I think we have to put a definition around impact.
Yes.
Jack alluded to it a bit earlier, talked about revenue and pipeline. Is that our definition, Jack, as we talk about proving our worth?
Yeah, and you could even extend it, I think, to retention and expansion, which could be nestled under revenue. But yeah, what are the bigger company goals and how are you lining up to those goals?
Yeah, a huge priority now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's some thoughts here. This is a little bit, I'm going to go to the theoretical, or not the theoretical, sorry, I'm going to go to the practical, but what I want to do is make sure that we're understanding ultimately, if we want to be legitimate contributors to the business, I feel like marketers have to step in and be willing to be the, use your sports analogy, but I'll say captain of pipeline, meaning so much of the pipeline that's produced in many businesses have nothing to do with marketing. A lot of partner pipeline, a lot of seller pipelines produced.
Yes.
And I think that if a CMO wants to be a legitimate and well-respected member of the team that's viewed well by investors, I think you have to step up and say, yes, I'm contributing X amount of pipeline, but I feel like our responsibility in marketing is to make sure that all the pipeline goals are met. So, and I also liked what Jack talked about. It's not just revenue and pipeline. It's also how are we contributing to other parts of the business? Seen some valuations for companies whose growth rates are CAGRs are okay, but their NRR is fantastic. And so how is marketing contributing there? But I think bottom line is, how are you putting yourself in a position to be the captain of all pipeline generation, not just the pipeline that your organization is producing? I think that's the first step.
Absolutely. I agree. One way we actually practically do this here, I lead a pipeline forecast meeting every week with all of the people responsible for pipeline generation. So we have myself, my head of demand gen on the call, leader of the VP of sales, who leads both our AE expansion motion as well as AE outbound motion. And then of course, BDR, our CRO joins, our VP of finance joins as well. We run this the same way that you would run a sales forecast meeting, right? We are going every single week, looking at trends, understanding where we think we're going to land for the month, where we think we're going to land for the quarter, what needs to happen in order to move the needle, where we might be falling behind, what trade-offs do we even maybe need to make if we're seeing success in one part of the business. That's real ownership over, do you have a clear understanding of how you're impacting not just marketing, but overall, pipelines. That's one practical way that we do it here. The other thing I would say just on this first question, I think that data is part of the story, but I also think that you can bring in things like industry benchmarks when you're presenting to the board, outside, customer insights. Like every board member wants to hear about specifically, what are customers saying? What are the anecdotes? There's so much more that you can bring to tell the story. It goes back to some of what we were talking about before, having that data, but then also being able to tell a bigger story with different proof points. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
I totally agree. I think the board is looking for marketing to really keep their thumb on the pulse of the market and come to the
Yes.
table with observations, what other companies are hearing. But I do want to talk really briefly about the importance of looking at pipeline regularly throughout the quarter. If you're waiting until the end of the quarter, it's too late. I think this is a big source of the tension between marketing and sales, is that sales is focused on closing what they can now to hit their number. That's how they feed their family. And marketing needs to be aware and concerned with how are they going to feed their family next quarter and the quarter after that. So if we start to see, we're like the canaries in the coal mine, right? If we start to see that pipeline dip, fortunately, as marketers, there are tools in our toolbox that we can use to help that team.
Yeah.
So it's just so critical to be regularly looking at that, because I can't tell you how many times I've been shocked that the sales team doesn't know what their pipeline generation is for the quarter. They have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because that's not where their focus is, even if it hurts them in future quarters. So let's talk about the pink elephant in the room we briefly touched on, but how much weight really is given to the metrics? Are there other things that marketing leaders are worried about when they're in the boardroom?
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. The metrics are really everything because, if you think about it, again, I'm going to lean into SaaS, pre-public organizations. That's where Jack and I are. It's a very different dynamic versus public. So let's just assume for a moment we're talking about investors who are on your board. Yeah, it's just too easy to show up and hide the ball. I think one of my best board members I've ever worked with, a woman named Katie Kime at LQ Digital, said, your job at the end of the day is to not hide the ball, right? In other words, it's to give the most important metrics that are providing, value to the business, as Jack talked about. So when you're showing up and you're not speaking to the metrics that are actually giving direction to the board, you get squished. And there's a new CMO that comes on board. And I think one of the things I learned from you, Kamala, is consistency in reporting between board meetings. Kamala's produced some amazing content, by the way, to sort of speak to this topic. How do you gain the respect of the board by showing up with the right data? And one of the tips I'll take from Kamala, sorry, Kamala, if you're going to talk to this, is just making sure that you're reporting the same data quarter by quarter. And then if you're adding new data, it's because you're reporting to a particular initiative. Launched a new website. I've got a new social channel. I've got a new channel like ABM I'm activated, and therefore I'm reporting these metrics.
Yeah, and to add to that just a little bit, because I can't help myself, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see is that marketers start a lot of the time with leading indicators as opposed to the punchline, which is bookings. And it makes them appear tone deaf to the rest of the organization if they start talking about how great their lead volume and lead production was when the sales team fell short. In order to look like a true team player, you need to address the state of the state and then work backward from there. So you can be optimistic about future quarters. You can say, I think I'm seeing some signs that things are turning around, and here's where I'm seeing that. But you need to start by acknowledging where everybody is as a team.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think the board wants to see that the CMO can functionally lead marketing, has a good understanding of the overall business, and has a good understanding of the market. And so it's not just about, short term. You need to be able to showcase what you're doing to meet short-term and long-term goals. I think that's really important if you're going to be the leader in the marketing team.
So John says, I appreciate the emphasis on bookings and pipeline, but what about required resourcing? What about costs to acquire? Yeah. That's absolutely essential. It needs to be in your deck. You have to speak to spend efficiency and efficiency overall in marketing. And part of proving that efficiency is having a good multi-touch attribution model and being able to tie that back to bookings. But yes, of course, you need to be reporting on cost of customer acquisition. Yes. Agreed. And that is more of an emphasis these days. I think growth at all costs is no longer acceptable. And we do need to be looking at efficiency. Yes, that needs to be in your deck. I agree.
Completely agree. And that's one of my core metrics that I believe very strongly in reporting, which is your for each dollar spent, what are your pipeline dollars in return? And if you're really advanced, because I think Jack would tell you that this is something she reports on too, but then what is your pipeline efficiency against revenue? And then can you back your cost model into that? Then we started getting into this funky unit economic stuff when it comes to customer acquisition cost versus lifetime value, which will make your investors really happy, but it tends to be abstract for your average marketer, right? So just being able to sort of start in that place where you can talk about spend efficiency, but also here's the thing, recognize what your spend efficiency can be given where you are in your growth cycle.
Yes.
And where you are versus competitors. So you'll get brand dominators, they're going to have 20 to 1, 30 to 1, 41 ratios in spend. You're breaking into the market. You don't have an awareness. You don't have the level of awareness they do. You're not going to have spend efficiency, and make sure those board members are aware, like, hey, my spend efficiency goal for the year is this, but I might do this so I can get to that later on.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I think we're hammering so much on pipeline and bookings because I know I've seen marketers make the mistake of reporting on initiatives or what they're doing in a single quarter and not reporting the top line numbers consistently. So I think that's why we keep harping on pipeline and bookings. We're not saying that LTV, CAC, spend efficiency numbers that are specific to marketing aren't important. It's just we don't want to see people focused on the vanity metrics. I mean, at least that's my feeling.
Yeah, I think this also goes back to creating the right goals with the rest of the leadership team. Like your budget should effectively be part of the bigger picture of what your company is willing to spend. You know, what is your burn multiple? That is part of where marketing gets, or, you know, marketing budget's obviously part of that. What's your CAC to LTV? Like you should be working with your finance team, your RevOps team, to figure out what those goals are. Your budget is part of that. And then what can you as a marketing team produce with that budget? That should all be part of the planning process, right? So I agree with everything, and hopefully adding a little bit of value there with that last comment.
And Jack, you can't do it retroactively. You're spot on. Like you really, that's step one, getting that alignment, because if you try and back into those numbers later on or justify them later on, it's a mess, right? So you're starting there. And I think that's an annual process of going back to CAC LTV. And Jack, you're spot on. Marketing budgets aren't random things. They are a reflection of that organization's ability to produce pipeline. And that's your spend efficiency ratio. But it also, like I said, it has to be based on where the organization is. It can't be based on where it wants to be. And I've had CEOs come in and be like, you should be at 10 to 1. I'm like, that sounds great, but here's where you are relative to other sort of dominators in the market. That's not realistic.
Yeah.
You got to wheeze out of me on that one. Let's see. So just a quick overview of what the board wants. We've been talking about this quite a bit, but yes, there's proof that I am spend efficiency is on the list. Absolutely. But ultimately what the board wants to see, in my experience, is we know the results, we know why it happened, and we know what to do next to make the next thing better. Anything to add there?
I think, you summed it up nicely.
So from an ops perspective, we touched on this a bit, so I'll go really quickly, but reporting on initiatives over standard KPIs quarter over quarter, it makes you look like you're hiding something, even if that's not your intent. So you may have all the good intentions, you're really excited about this big, costly thing that you did. If you're not reporting on the top line numbers, it looks like you're trying to hide something. And then starting with, I think as marketers, we're really taught to be positive and put a positive spin on things. I know we do that with our products and other things. So it's really tempting to go in with a really positive story in the boardroom, and that's not always appropriate if things aren't rosy across the entire go-to-market team. And then finger pointing. That's the big killer for any go-to-market leader, I think. So being defensive and not speaking to what you're seeing and what you're doing within your organization, because you can only control what you can control. Anything else to add here?
I don't know. I feel like to some degree, folks were trying to help ops understand how to better support their CMOs, yes. Right? How do you get lined up so that they're able to report what they need to? And the thing that just strikes me is, ask. And so ask what they're reporting on, but also what numbers don't they trust?
Yes.
Because we all, like, even in the most pristine data situation, caliber mine, just pristine data, there's still data I don't trust.
Yep.
And we're effectively a RevOps company, right? That's all we do. So it's fairly easy to understand what's going well and what's not. But if you can sort of help get in there and be a part of the team that says, what data am I reporting on, but where do I feel I lack confidence in, or therefore the ability to understand data, and then be the person that provides that help.
And I think from the other side, as somebody who's been in operations and then moved to leadership, you see different things and you start to understand why certain questions are being asked. I didn't know what to ask my leader in order to provide them with the best information. So just having a really honest dialogue about, I know you have a bunch of context that I don't have, or maybe I don't need all of it, but I need to understand more in order to provide you with what the rest of the business needs to trust what we're reporting on. So just having that conversation, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and I agree with both of what you both said. I would add too, I mean, Doug, you were starting to get into this, but not just what do you need, but the insights too. The more you can bring, hey, I'm noticing this in the data, like maybe we don't believe some of the data or need more information to have trust in it, but also as a revenue operations leader, in any part of the business, if you can help bring insights, things you're noticing that maybe your CMO or leadership team doesn't know or isn't seeing, I think that's also really, really valuable to any leader, things to look at that they just might not have on their radar.
Great point. So we took a swipe at figuring out what makes sense by stage. We understand that a lot of the tooling, even if it's sometimes even especially if it's a DIY model, can get very expensive for multi-touch attribution, because if you're doing it yourself, you're probably talking about a data warehouse or a customer data platform and then stacking some kind of data visualization tool on top of it. So we really wanted to touch on what's realistic and then what's good to have and best in class. So I think the goal of every marketer is to be able to predict where the market is going and what they need to do in order to really succeed. But there are a lot of steps along the way to get there. So Jack, would love your thoughts on this kind of graphic.
No, I think this is a nice visual just to share in general, like key things you should be thinking about at each stage. I mean, when I look at this graphic, it's really kind of the TLDR for me is that you are getting more insights, right? The more mature you get and the more best in class you get. And so it goes back to a lot of what we've already been talking about. Like you got to start somewhere and then you can keep building on that so that you have different inputs, different data points to make decisions. So, I mean, getting maybe more specific, like going back to, we've talked a lot about attribution, but start with first touch attribution. Are you just somehow measuring how people are getting to you, and then add on, multiple touches? How are you going to measure that? How are you going to weigh that? How do you report on that? That's how, you keep getting better and better and understanding what's working. That's kind of my initial reaction to this, but Doug, would love to hear if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I love these models because at the end of the day, it sort of helps us rationalize where we are versus where we need to be. So I really like that. If there was a ability to have this be three-dimensional, I think, Jack, I go to an earlier point you made, which is, are you selling to demand units or are you selling to individuals? And that can really change how you look at this as well. But here's some advice, having done this for a long time, gray hair for a reason. The first thing is, if you're early stage, get to best in class as quickly as you can. Get there fast, okay? And the reason I say that is, and again, I'll use the same metaphor, but we're all sort of having this discussion in the industry being multi-touch attribution, which is, so what's our core metric? Like, what are we representing to CMOs and CFOs in terms of the ability of your organization to have the data that you need to understand what's performing and what's not? In other words, multi-touch attribution, and having these conversations about customer acquisition costs, like what are the other potential metrics we could lean into? But the metaphor I used earlier, I'll use again is, what's the ROI of not crashing your car every time you get into it? And for me, that's really what's happening for most organizations that don't have an efficacious way to track what's working, what's not. And this is not about, like, I feel like Camel and I, we have this debate a lot. It's not about like who gets credit. It's what's working, right? So if you're in that early stage, get to best in class as quickly as you can. Get over there quickly. There's lots of Frankenstacks out there, to be sure. So we don't want to be just throwing stuff on top of other stuff. So do so in a rational way. But if you're early stage, and especially growth stage, and you don't have multi-touch attribution, you can't track intent, you don't understand who's engaging and why, you've already lost your competition.
Yep.
That's a good point.
And I think another dynamic we're not showing here is how much work ops needs to put in to be able to teach the marketing team either how to fish or understand what they need to provide. Because not every person in your company is going to be great out of the gate at pattern matching and being comfortable with numbers. Learning how to make people more comfortable with what they're looking at and really taking the time to understand where people are and having those conversations is so critical to ensuring their success. So I know a lot of people build reports and get really frustrated that they're not being used. Well, people don't always know what to ask for, and maybe it wasn't what they really wanted. So it is so critical to dig in and ask all of the questions to really figure out what each team needs in terms of those quote unquote vanity metrics or leading indicators. There's probably a valid reason why they're asking for something. So make sure that you just have that very open dialogue. Okay. So I love this teaching up in quotes. Doug made me put it in quotes. So I think we touched on this a bit. Don't assume. Assume makes an ass out of you and me. I had an ops mentor teach me that really early on because I saw all the data. I saw a lot in the data, but I didn't know everything that was going on with the business or what their ultimate goals were. So for example, I wasn't always privy to whether or not our goal was to exit on an acquisition or whether we were still chasing an IPO. So not having that information can really impact the interpretation of data. So I think just keep in mind that your leadership team is probably privy to information you don't know. And then I would love to hear from both of you, Jack and Doug. What are things ops people on your teams have done to really get the dialogue going around board deck season? Because usually there's a really, really tight turnaround time, and you may not always feel like you have time to really discuss the findings. How have you had operations people kind of help you prioritize that?
Jack, you want to go first?
I can jump in for sure. I think I actually think it goes back to the consistency, not just looking at data once in a while, not looking at data right when you have a board meeting. Like if you really have a handle on your business, you're actually looking at these things consistently week over week, or at least month over month, right? And have a good understanding so that you do have those insights and it's not like a last minute rush. So I think from an ops perspective, the more you can help put those processes in place, have that consistent reporting, drive with your marketing leader, lead those types of conversations, that's really where you want to be. So that, again, you're not just like, oh, give me a bunch of reports, I have no idea actually how to talk about these things. That's where everyone gets into trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm going to borrow a pro tip from Kamala here when describing how RevOps has showed up really well for me in my career. And the first is standard. Make sure you're reporting the same metrics quarter over quarter. And as you're heading into a board meeting, sometimes, this is a bit too much, but how are we doing 6 weeks out in terms of accumulating the data, especially if you've got complex data sets and you don't have an attribution tool, you've got a DIY. So making sure you feel confident in the data. That could be a month out, could be 2 weeks out, but that check-in. The other thing is, and this is the scramble Camel is speaking to, but sort of reaching out 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time and saying, what data do you need to provide proof of say, an initiative or a change in the business. And I have to say, so your staff RevOps people, that's asking a lot, right? But for those of you that are leading RevOps teams, this is well within your purview to be an active participant and saying, hey, TMO, where are we with our metrics? Let's take a look at what we're tracking to right now. Not the performance, but actually the integrity of the data. And then asking early on, and this is where my best RevOps teams, they're coming to me early on going, gee, I'm feeling not so good about this data, or like, do you have the right data? What can I do to help heading in?
Yeah, I just felt like Chicken Little. Let's see, just touched on the weekly pipeline meeting. What are some other cadences you have used to ensure data is being analyzed, discussed, and acted upon regularly? Jack, I know you have the weekly pipeline review. Are there other data points?
Yeah. So we have a couple of different reviews that happen on a regular cadence. In my weekly marketing meeting, we look at our marketing metrics as a marketing team every week, everything that's happening in the funnel. And our operations team is part of that. On a monthly basis, we do what we call our demand generation look back, where we actually share out, again, what our KPIs are, how we're tracking, and then kind of that next level down, right? Channel by channel, trends, things like that, with our go-to-market leaders. And then actually at the executive level, in addition to the pipeline meeting, we also do a total operations monthly look back, where each department shares out what's happening. So, I mean, again, that kind of it's aligned with everything I'm talking about. One of our core values at WorkRamp is operational excellence. So we really try to have operational excellence, but it's putting those touch points in place with the right people and doing that consistently and sharing the same data over and over and over again. That's how we approach it here.
I have nothing to add, Kendall. That's best practice stuff that Jack is speaking to. And I would say you're not going to get there right away. Jack's obviously done this for a while and it's sort of put these systems in place. But I love this idea of a first step being just have a weekly, I love the weekly meeting, Jack, with all the different pipeline stakeholders for so many reasons, but primarily, you're creating an open dialogue. You're also building credibility, but you're also saying we're in this together. I really like that as a starting point for everything that Jack's talking about.
Yeah, and at much smaller companies, that could look like an executive representative from each of the teams reviewing core KPIs. And that is a fantastic forum to bring up any issues you're seeing with pipeline production, any help you need closing business. With the smaller, scrappy companies, it can turn into an all hands on deck situation, which I think is, normal for that stage. All right, so we are almost at the top of the hour here. I do want to thank Jack and Doug. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. This has been wonderful. We do have a couple minutes for questions, so feel free to pop those in there, but I do want to let people know that this has been recorded. We will be sharing the recording and the deck. And then Treveni has also dropped some excellent resources in there. I also do want to plug, we do have an on-demand board reporting class through the RevOps Co-op, and I believe Caliber Mind has one specific to marketing. So please check out those resources. We're getting a lot of thank yous.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up since I'm not seeing any more questions pop in. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you. Bye.